But yeah, again, thanks everyone for having me. Excited to give another version of this presentation, which, as Lee was saying, if you were able to attend the TNJIC conference this year up in Dixon at Montgomery Bell State Park, I gave a version of this talk, so you may have heard it there, but I had a lot less time to give it there, and I was rushing through stuff and omitted some things. So this is the longer, hopefully more relaxed version of this presentation. I'm calling this Experience Builder, Advice, Hints, and Recommendations for App Success, kind of some of what I've learned as I've been doing more and more work in Experience Builder, which that's a nice title if you're uh, having this on a agenda for a upcoming webinar or something like that. But to make the same joke I made at TNJIC, I was curious what ChatGPT would call this presentation to kind of make it sound a little bit more exciting than just here's Experience Builder. And it went with Experience Builder, the most boringly exciting GIS tool you'll ever use, which I thought was, of course, that was like the funniest response it gave. It gave some other not exciting or funny responses. But I do think while it is a little bit snarky, it actually is a good way to think about Experience Builder, because maybe if you, as part of your job or for fun, I guess, are using Experience Builder and maybe it's not the most exciting thing in the world to have learn this entirely new system, to have to figure out why something is or isn't working. Um, just, like here's another piece of Esri software that we need to use and learn. But I personally find it to be actually a really exciting opportunity. I do feel like Experience Builder gives us the chance to make web applications kind of out of the box in ways that we haven't been able to do before. So I get really excited about it. It may not be it may still be a little boring at the end of the day, but I do feel like Experience Builder is something that opens a lot of doors for us. And so I'm excited to share a little bit of what I learned. But honestly, hopefully, as I'm talking today, you might hear some things that I'm like, oh yeah, I've learned this as I've started doing some Experience Builder apps, or I don't think he's right with what he's saying. Or if there's any other comments that come to mind, I really hope we can have a bit of a discussion at the end, because I think we're all still learning Experience Builder. So, curious to hear your thoughts as well. Don't want this just to be a lecture, me talking at you. Hopefully, some things come to mind for you all as well. So really quickly before I get going, kind of what's my point overview of this presentation? Um, I am kind of targeting it at hopefully you all, people who are most likely GIS professionals, who are managing web applications, primarily using out-of-the-box templates and from Esri. I know there's other options, but as a state of Tennessee employee, we're using all the Esri stuff. And again, mostly out of the box, meaning I know there's the whole developer edition side of everything. You can custom code your own widgets and apps and everything. And I don't do that. Maybe one day I'll learn how to do that, but I'm more just, right, what can we do just by going to the Experience Builder website on ArcGIS Online or on your enterprise portal? How can we set that up? I'm assuming as well that you are relatively or have at least some familiarity with Web App Builder. We'll talk about Web App Builder in a second and why we're going to be focusing, or why I'm going to mention that. And likewise, I'm assuming that you have at least some familiarity with Experience Builder. Maybe you've opened it up before, maybe you've started making a few web mapping applications on it. Maybe you've gotten frustrated with it because you're like, why isn't it doing what I need it to do? So you may not be an expert on Experience Builder yet. That's totally fine. I'm trying to target some of these tips and tricks for people like probably most of us who are really still getting familiar with Experience Builder. But I'm hoping you want to learn more. I hope that's why you're here today. Most of what I'll be talking about today are going to be more focused on broad tips that will kind of that could benefit everybody making an experience on Experience Builder. So I'm not really going to dive too much into like the data focused widgets or those very particular things, because unless you're working for a DOT as well, you're probably not all that interested in like the linear referencing widgets in Experience Builder. But instead, though, I'm more focusing on the sort of layout and functionality aspects, how to make your app look good, how to make it look good across various different screen sizes, how to make it feel like something professional and not just something you kind of hacked together because you still can't, you're still having trouble figuring out how to make Experience Builder do what you want it to do. And then some caveats to the presentation. I'm still considering myself relatively new to Experience Builder. I'm not going to pretend I'm an expert. These are things I've mostly picked up from playing around with Experience Builder myself as well. Some of this I actually got from attending a few different Esri conferences. I was fortunate enough to get to go to the Esri Developer Summit, I guess is what they call it, earlier this year. Even though I don't really consider myself a developer, but they had some good things to share there about Experience Builder. Some of that I've built into this presentation as well. But that said, of course, I am not an Esri employee. So if you've got your complaints about Experience Builder, call up your Esri reps. I'm sure they would love to hear your recommendations on how to make it better. And kind of on top of all of that, something that I think is kind of a common learning experience for all of us using Experience Builder, I do sort of keep changing my mind about the best way to approach things. I actually gave the initial version of this presentation about this time last year for one of the Tinjik like fall forums, I guess almost a year ago now. And some of the stuff I said then versus some of the stuff I said now, pretty different. So maybe that means don't listen to me. Maybe I have no idea what I'm talking about. But honestly, I think it's more a reflection of like a lot of things we learn working with GIS technology. We think we learn one really great way how to do something, and then we come back a few days, a few weeks, a few months later, and we're like, why did we do it that way? Like, we could have just done this and it would have been 10 times as better. And so I think that's part of the learning process here with Experience Builder too, that the more you use it, the more you realize that there's probably better ways you can be doing things. And so some of my advice, I may have changed. Finally, just as like a clerical thing, all of the screenshots I have on here are from ArcGIS Online. I used to say the most recent, but I got the news that ArcGIS or that Esri did their 3 times a year update to ArcGIS Online last night. So there honestly might be a few new features in Experience Builder that I haven't seen yet because I literally just updated it. But I'm assuming the screenshots are still mostly fine. So really quickly, with that all out of the way, I mentioned Web App Builder. Web App Builder, of course, was this lovely web application out-of-the-box template platform, whatever Esri wants to call it, that I'm sure we all use and used a lot. I know we at Tennessee DOT used it a lot. And I'm sure you've heard from your Esri reps that, of course, Web App Builder is going away, right? With Experience Builder ideally being the replacement for Web App Builder. These are the timelines. I don't have to read them off for you, but these are the timelines that Esri says about when will be the final releases of Web App Builder. And the main thing that they point out is that while even though maybe on your enterprise portal after the release after the first half of 2025, you won't be able to make new Web App Builder apps anymore, but you should, this is what Esri says, you should still be able to use those old applications until web browsers themselves start updating to no longer support JavaScript 3.x. That's the older JavaScript technology that's behind like the Map Viewer Classic and Web App Builder and the configurable apps and old dashboards, all the old stuff that Esri is getting rid of. That's essentially going to be retired very soon. And so that's why those things will eventually go away. So hopefully you knew these timelines. Again, hopefully your Esri reps have been doing a good job communicating this to you. Hopefully this isn't news. But this is kind of like one of the impetuses for doing this presentation is knowing that Web App Builder is going away and that Experience Builder is sort of the replacement for it. We're all kind of in that process now, just like moving from ArcMap to ArcGIS Pro. We're in that process of learning the new thing. So hopefully this will help with some of that learning process. So what I did today, and sorry I didn't make a more recent map, but when I did this presentation for Tinjik a few months ago, I put together this map. We had a solar eclipse in that previous fall, and we were getting ready to have the upcoming, or maybe it just happened, the total solar eclipse that happened earlier this year. And so I just made a pretty simple web map on ArcGIS Online. I have the paths here of the 2 different solar eclipses. This was the annular, the Ring of Fire eclipse that happened, I think, last fall. And then this was the one that happened this spring. Hopefully you got to see it. You could have gone up to the far, far northwest corner of Tennessee for all 15 square miles there that had it, totality. Excuse me. I was lucky enough to go up to Indianapolis to visit my aunt and uncle. And of course, that was right in the path of totality, which was really great to get to see that. But anyway, showing those paths. And then in the background, it's just population estimates. So you can kind of see the cities or the highly populated areas that were going to be covered by totality. And then if you were to zoom in, you would see some park locations. So maybe you wanted to go to a park to view the eclipse. Where would the closest park to you be? So again, pretty simple web map. It's more just for demonstration purposes. It's really just showcasing data. We're not doing any analysis or anything out of this map. And then eventually what I did is, this is the Experience Builder app I ended up making. I am going to be using screenshots today to avoid having to deal with the potential issues of live demos. But this is essentially the app I made. Pretty simple Experience Builder app. I wanted to keep it relatively simple for the purposes of a presentation. But you can see here, kind of use this dashboard style sort of format, even though it's Experience Builder, title at the top, some images and text to explain the 2 types of eclipses that happened, total and annular. It's just an attribute table widget over here if you wanted to learn more about the paths of totality. And then the near me widget. So maybe you could just, here's my location on a map. Where is some of the closest parks to me that I might want to go to view that eclipse? So what I'll do today is kind of show you some screenshots about how I ended up making this application, as well as some things that I kept in mind as I was making it. So kind of keep this in mind as the end goal. And what I'll then show is kind of how I got there. So the first sort of piece of advice, and I actually added this for this presentation as I've thought about it more, is even though Esri is calling Experience Builder the upgrade, the replacement to Web App Builder, I do feel like a lot of times that's going to be the case, right? If you have old Web App Builder applications, most likely you're going to be making them in Experience Builder. In just the same way, if you use the old configurable apps, that was just those really, really old ones that Esri used to have, the instant apps kind of became the replacement for that. And again, a lot of times that was the upgrade path you would use. That said, I kind of view Experience Builder as sort of the last resort option in the sense that it is the hardest to set up. It does take the most of your time to set up. It can be the most frustrating. It often is going to be the thing we're going to go to. So even though it's the last resort, it's kind of a common last resort. But one thing I think is useful to keep in mind is, okay, if you have an app in mind that you're trying to make, maybe you are trying to upgrade a web app builder app to something else that will continue to work. I don't think you always necessarily have to go exactly to Experience Builder, especially for the simpler things. Esri doesn't really say it up front, but I do feel like as the instant apps honestly get better and better, there is kind of this like hidden path where at times, it's not going to be all the time for sure, but there are times where you're going to make your life a lot easier if you have a web app builder app and you could just make it in an instant app, especially again for those relatively simple things that you may have had in web app builder. The instant apps are actually pretty advanced, even though they are pretty easy to set up. So I would encourage you to take a look at those. Again, it's not going to be every instance. There's going to be a lot of times where you may have to go to Experience Builder. That said, though, too, of course, you could also consider the dashboards or story maps. I do feel like those are still even a little bit easier to set up than Experience Builder. So long story short of this slide is, if you don't have to go to Experience Builder, that actually may be the easiest thing at the end of the day. Like maybe that's the best advice. Like use it when you need to, but don't just automatically default to that. That said, though, if you do need to use Experience Builder, do keep in mind that Esri has included a lot of pre-configured templates as part of Experience Builder. And those templates were designed to very closely mimic the application templates you had on Web App Builder. And so if you are directly translating a Web App Builder app into Experience Builder, take a look at those templates because you'll see a lot of similarities. Moreover, Esri's done a lot of the design work for you so that they should look good across multiple different screen sizes, tablets, mobile phones, desktops. Again, you don't have to use one of those, but it is a nice feature that I think gets somewhat overlooked sometimes because it's, everyone's like, I'm just going to make something from scratch. I know what I'm doing, but those templates actually can be really useful, especially if you are upgrading from a web app builder app. But let's say you've done all this and you're like, you know what? No, I need to start from scratch. I'm going to make something in Experience Builder. And that's what I decided to do for my application. And so the first thing I did, and kind of the first main piece of advice that I have, is creating an outline of your work before you start. Here's my outline of what I want my app to look like. Even before I open up my web browser, I, in this case, use PowerPoint. You could just use pencil and paper, but I kind of drew out this sort of wireframe about where all of my different elements of my application would go. And it turns out that our grade school teachers were right when they were teaching us how to write an essay, and they were like, write an outline first, because if you don't, your thoughts are going to go all over the place and you're going to forget things and you're going to have to try to rearrange stuff later. It's the same advice here, right? If you just kind of start throwing stuff onto Experience Builder, it's just going to get messy. It's going to get hard to use. I really think it benefits you to have your plan of attack, as it were, before you start creating your application. So you can see, again, even though mine is a pretty simple application, you can see where I put these things, or where I plan to put these things once I actually start building it. I also put down here, focus on the desktop design first. Again, I know it's also tempting. One of Experience Builder's nicest features is the fact that it can do the mobile and tablet views, which is something that Web App Builder was a little less good at. And I know it's really tempting to just focus on those because it's like everyone's using apps on phones now. Who cares about desktop, which is becoming more and more true. But the way Experience Builder is set up, it actually benefits you to really start by focusing on that desktop view first, at least for now. I have a feeling that one day Esri might change their mind about this, but at least for now, focus on the desktop version first, and we'll worry about the tablet and mobile views later. Likewise, as you're making this outline, a few other things that you can keep in mind. I don't really have like much in the way of screenshots about this, but in my case, I only have one page, right? One screen of my application. You could, of course, have multiple pages. So think about those ahead of time, create these different wireframes for each page if you do that. For each page you have, decide if it's going to be a full screen, or in other words, a fixed or this dashboard style application, kind of like I'm going through here. Or if you want to have a scrolling application, like so people can scroll through the page. That's really good when you have mixed media or when a map isn't really like the main focus of your application. And then something I learned actually as I was doing some research for this, I haven't tried this out myself, so maybe one of you all have. There is this option if you do have a scrolling page to use what they call screen groups. That kind of gives that parallax effect, where as you scroll down the page, like your background image stays in place, but maybe some text or some other stuff moves through. They do this on story maps all the time, right? And then eventually you get to a scrolling point and then everything moves up, right? And then there's more stuff that you see. I think it makes, it can be a little disorienting, but I do feel like it is that one of those little things to make your application look that just much better. So maybe think about how you would plan to use one of those as you're outlining your work. And then likewise as well, if you are going to have any windows, those splash screens or other windows that might pop up as people are using your application, plan those out as well. Long story short, outline as much as you can ahead of time. It's just going to make your life easier in the long run. Second piece of advice then is, now that you've got that plan in mind, is going to be really understanding and using the layout widgets. Again, I mentioned I'm not really going to be talking about the data-focused widgets here today, since those can be a little bit more specific for various use cases. But the layout widgets are pretty universal, and I think they're really important. The way I like to think about layout widgets are essentially like packing cubes. So maybe you're going on a trip, you get your suitcase out, you start packing, and you're just throwing your clothes, your shoes, your towels, whatever, just kind of into your suitcase, and you're hoping it's all going to fit, and you're like squeezing stuff in, and sometimes you get, you run out of room, or sometimes you have just like a random space in your suitcase that like nothing fits in, and you're like, well, that's just going to be empty space. And that, eventually you'll get there and it'll be fine. But if you're smart, like my fiance, and maybe one day I'll learn my lesson too, you use these packing cubes, right? These little boxes that you can put your clothes or your shoes or your towels into. And then it becomes a lot easier for you to get those into place in your suitcase, to move them around if need be, to take them out, replace them. So by means of an analogy, hopefully you can see what we're going for here. If our application is our suitcase, these layout widgets are the packing cubes. They're going to take our different widgets that we want on our application, and you're going to put them inside those layout widgets, inside those packing cubes. And it's going to make it easier for you to have that finer control over how things are showing up on your application. That's the by means of metaphor example, but let's take a look at what that actually looks like in practice. So here's my same outline that I was just showing you before, but this time every green box was where I plan to put a layout widget, right? So I have a layout widget, a packing cube, that's just going to have this text box at the top. That's the only thing inside of it. Same thing here for the web map. I've got a big one there. For this horizontal row here, I had, this is going to be the image and the text of a total eclipse, the image and the text of the annular eclipse. And so I'm putting all those things into one packing cube, one layout widget. And then same thing over here for these two data widgets I ended up using in this column, two widgets in one packing cube, in one layout widget. And you might look at this and be like, okay, you really didn't change anything. Like, why do I need to, like, why should I use these packing cubes? Like, if it's not really going to, still the same result at the end of the day, like, why can't I just put stuff onto the blank screen and just go from there? So let's think about why that might be useful. So let's say, for instance, as you're planning this out, you know that you want this column to always be 36% of the total width of your application, right? Which means this is going to be 64%, if I'm doing my math correctly. And you also know that in this area here, you want both of these boxes to be the same size, probably the same width is what I meant to say there. And so, you could do the math and be like, okay, well, half of 64 is 32, so I would make this 32% wide, 32% wide, 36% wide, and then, I don't need a layout widget, right? I've just done the math. I've outsmarted him. But let's say you then realize that, oh, actually, I want this to only be 30%. And now I need to go in here and start resizing each of those one by one and doing some more math. Or maybe I actually add another widget in here. Despite me planning ahead of time, I realize I need another widget in here. And now I need to start rethinking about what that math is going to be. On the other hand, if I did have both of these things in one layout widget, and I just have two of them in here, now I know that no matter how wide that layout widget is, whether it's 64% wide or 70% wide or 60% wide, this is always going to be 50% of the width of that layout widget. I'm keeping myself organized. I don't have to worry about redoing math or redoing numbers every single time I make changes to my application. And even though that sounds like a pretty simple example, the amount of time I personally save by using the layout widgets to not have to worry about resizing things after I've got them on my display has been a really great time saver for me. Moreover, So that's essentially kind of what these two bullets are saying. Moreover, as you start including these layout widgets, that outline you get on the left side of your screen, it's going to be a lot easier to see, kind of giving yourself like a hierarchy, kind of like adding group layers in your ArcGIS Pro table of contents. You're kind of giving yourself a hierarchy. So you can be like, oh yes, my data widgets, that's going to be in that data widget or the data layout widget. This information, that's going to be in the Eclipse information layout widget. It just keeps yourself a little bit more organized as well. So I really love the layout widgets, really think they're useful. Even for something simple like this, it is a good thing to have. So I've now jumped over here to Experience Builder, finally in Experience Builder. And you can see I've started adding these layout widgets over here. I have one column layout widget, and I have 3 row layout widgets. And you can kind of see how that looks similar to what I had over here. I haven't obviously added the stuff to it yet, but you can see how that's the same, more or less, thing that I made before. What I then did is I made sure I actually went over to my outline and I renamed these things because I had 3 row widgets. And if I just left them as row 1, row 2, like it's going to be hard for me again to remember which is which. So rename stuff. It takes so little time, but it's super useful. Same thing with the column. Even though I have just one column, I renamed that as well. I then thought about how wide do I want these things to be? And this is one of those things where initially I was like, I'm just gonna, I don't, you know, I want my application to look good on everyone's screen. So I'm just gonna use like auto with everything and hope it works the best. But something I kind of learned over time is for things that you don't want to be changing across screen sizes, no matter if someone's using a very large monitor like I am today, or your laptop screen, or smaller screen, a tablet or what phone or whatever, those things that shouldn't really change size, you should think about using pixel widths. So in my case, this title bar, no matter what screen it's on, I decided that I wanted that to be 80 pixels tall, no matter what size screen that's on. That means the width can stretch to fill the width of somebody's screen, no matter how skinny or wide it is, but the height, always 80 pixels. Same thing for here. This one, always 224 pixels, make it stretch until it hits this column. This one, 320 pixels wide, make it stretch its height until it fills. But then the map, right? The map here at the bottom, I really don't care about its proportions. I don't really need to lock in a height or a width, right? Because it's a map. People can move around if they need to find where they want to go. So in that case, the map, because it is a lot more flexible in that sense, I'm using that stretch or auto, kind of either one works, the stretch height or the stretch width. So it's essentially just filling the remaining space. And again, initially I was not using pixels at all because that felt so rigid. I'm like, no, I want things to be flexible and move around. But it leads to kind of weird results. It's hard to predict how every single screen size is going to be that everyone is using. So by giving yourself locked heights or widths when you can, you're actually going to make your app look a lot more uniform over time. For whatever reason as well, Esri was also like, in web design, make everything multiples of 16 or 8. So I don't know if that's true. Maybe somebody knows, but that's why I'm using some weird numbers here. I kind of also helps me pick out what size to use because I'm just like, it's going to be a multiple of 16 or 8. And then I don't have to worry about having too many different heights to choose from. The next piece of advice then, so now that I've got a lot of that design out of the way, is understanding the pending list. The pending list I do feel like doesn't get enough attention from Esri. Maybe it's getting a little bit more now. But you can think of the pending list as like a temporary holding location. So by means of an example, what I did initially is, remember back here, I had my row and I was going to put a photo, text, one photo and one text for the 2 different types of eclipses. Oops. And so I started doing that over here. I've got my photo, my text, but I realized that I wanted there to be a clearer difference between this group of photo and text and the other group that I hadn't had added yet. I wanted there to be a clearer distinction between the two, kind of a break in the middle of it. And I realized actually the best way of doing that would be to use more layout widgets, more packing cubes. So that's what I then started doing over here. Within my one wide horizontal packing cube, I put 2 additional row widgets, 2 additional packing cubes. So this stuff over here, this isn't in any layout widget yet. It's just in, well, it's not in either of these layout widgets. It's in this big one over here. But now I needed to move this essentially over here, right? And for whatever reason, maybe Esri will change this at some point too, you can't just go to your outline and like click and drag this to be where you want it to be, right? I'm sure you've tried that and you're like, why can't I just click and drag? And maybe one day we can. But I was like, well, if I can't click and drag it, I guess I'm gonna have to recreate it over here in this layout widget. So I guess that means I just need to go in here and delete these things and reconfigure them again, even though I spent all that work to find the photo and I did all that configuration already on this text. Like, that's annoying, I have to delete it. But again, turns out that's not the case. What you can do instead is take the thing that you've already configured, go to its three-dot menu, and hit move to the pending list. That's going to temporarily remove it from your view here on the screen, but it's going to put it off to the side in that temporary holding area, meaning you can then bring it back later and it'll still be set up just how you had it set up before. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to put this image and this text into the pending list. And so there's the result. Now I've got these two sub layout widgets, laid out over here. I made them both essentially 50% wide. And now I can go over back to the pending list, and there was the same image and text that I had already formatted. And now I can actually just take these and drag them over to where I want them to be. So I didn't have to delete my work. I just put them over to the pending list and I was able to reuse them rather than having to recreate them. Now that said, someone actually asked me this question at TNJIC. They said they had been using the pending list and they found a problem where if they had something in a layout widget initially and they put something in the pending list and then they deleted that layout widget that originally had this thing that was in the pending list, that these widgets would also get deleted. That feels like a bug. I feel like that's not what Esri is intending. Again, maybe they just fixed that last night. I haven't had time to test yet. So just sometimes be aware that as much as I love the pending list, it's still a little bit buggy. Surprise, surprise. But most of the time, this worked for me. I was able to put these over here and then reconfigure these layout widgets and then bring these things back in. So here you can see how that kind of resulted, right? So here was that image and text again, but now this whole thing here is in a layout widget. This is in a layout widget. And then this entire box is its own layout widget. So lots of cascading packing cubes, lots of cascading layout widgets. I've done some additional work now. I kind of fast forwarded here. I've configured my near me widget. I configured the attributes. I've done the rest of this work here. And I'm doing everything here on the desktop view, focusing on that first, taking a look at the live view, clicking on how things work, changing the resolutions over here, especially like finding the smallest resolution they have to offer, just to make sure things look good. And even using the preview and literally just changing the size of my browser window to see how things look. I know it's really tempting, and I make this mistake a lot too, where you originally configure your app on Experience Builder on your laptop screen and it looks great. And then you plug in an external monitor and look at your application again, and you're like, ooh, this does not look great. So always good to test out. But again, we're focusing just on the desktop view first. I did that. It looks good to me. So now I'm going to go over to the tablet and mobile views, which leads us to this button here, which I do feel like it took me a while to understand what it does, despite hearing Esri explain it a few times, this auto and custom. So by default, the auto view is set up for tablet and mobile views, meaning that any changes you make on the desktop view will automatically get pushed down into the tablet and mobile views. So that way you only have to worry about configuring it on the desktop view, and then it's automatically on your other ones, which is useful when you're initially setting things up. And the way that Experience Builder, how stuff flows, and that's why I'm focusing first on the desktop. Make everything look good on the desktop view, because then this is automatically going to have all those things also show up on tablet and mobile. And sometimes the result of auto looks good, especially if you're using one of those templates I was mentioning at the beginning. The result probably is going to be pretty useful here, where things are going to get organized in a pretty meaningful way for these other screen sizes. But in my case, when I was configuring everything by scratch, this was the result of auto. And, it's not the greatest, right? This text looks kind of small. This title is obviously extending beyond the width I have available to me. I want to maybe make this column a little bit less wide so the map takes up more space. So I'm going to hit custom. But once I hit custom, I'm breaking that link from desktop to tablet. So again, that's why I want to make sure that most of my work, especially in terms of configuring these widgets that I'm adding to my application, that most of that work I've already done before I hit custom. But I've done all my work I want to do, so I'm going to click custom, and now I can start reconfiguring all these things. Which then leads to the next kind of observation or lesson. When you're configuring a widget, you get your side menu over here, and there's content options and style options, and sometimes there's another menu. Can't remember what it is off the top of my head. When you're configuring a setting in the content menu, that setting is going to apply to all your different views: desktop, tablet, mobile. Even if you've already, or even if you have clicked on this custom view, even if you've broken the link between desktop and tablet, if you're changing something in the content tab, it's going to change it on all those views. That's not the case for style. Style is just going to be for whatever screen size you're currently looking at. But content, that's for all of them. So in my case, right, the title up here was, again, it was too big. I know this box is covering it, but it was extending beyond the width of my screen. So easy enough, I could just go down here and change the pixel size, right, and make it smaller. But it's a content setting. So if I were to do that, now back here on the desktop view, that title is now actually too small because it's the same pixel setting, right? It's a content setting. It's going to apply to all the different views. So I clicked on undo because I didn't mean to do that. But then I was like, okay, well, how can I make it so that it's one size over here on desktop and a different size on mobile? Is that even possible? Maybe I just need to use a really tiny font size so that it works on all the different views. Again, of course not. There is a way around it. This is when the pending list is going to come to our rescue once again. So I'm over here on my tablet view. What I'm going to do is find that original title text that I had in my desktop view. Again, it got into the tablet view as well because auto was originally turned on. But now that I'm in custom, I can modify these things. So I would go over here. I actually duplicated this. So now I have a title text for my tablet. And what I'm going to do now for that original title text is I'm going to move it to the pending list. Because I'm in custom, it's just going to move it to the pending list for this tablet view. It's not going to move it to the pending list on the desktop or mobile views. I don't want to hit delete because if I hit delete over here, again, even though I'm custom, if I hit delete over here, it's going to delete that title from my desktop view as well, which is not what I want to do. But pending list, it's that temporary holding location off to the side. So I can move this title to the pending list and it'll remove that bigger font version from my tablet view. And now this tablet text title that I have here, it's just on my tablet view. And now I can go over to the content tab and configure it to be the size I want to use. So I don't even know if trick is the right word there because I think that's the intended behavior, but definitely a good thing to know. Like if you need to configure something and it's a content tab setting on one of your different screen sizes, make a copy of it, move the original thing to the pending list and configure your copy so that you're just focusing on that one. I did the same sort of thing using the pending list here on the mobile view, where in general on mobile screens, as we all know, very limited screen size. So usually less is more. It's usually a good idea to probably take things off completely on the mobile view. In my case, I wanted to get rid of these two data widgets on the mobile view. Like if you happen to be looking at this application on mobile, sorry, you don't get a mirror me widget, but you can at least still see the map. You can still learn about the eclipses. You can still see where the eclipse paths are going to be. So just like before, I don't want to hit delete in my mobile view because even though I'm on custom, if I hit delete, it's going to delete it everywhere. I don't want to do that. Instead, I'm just going to move it to the pending list. So that way it's going to remove it from this view, but not remove it from the other views as well. So I really love the pending list. That's like 3 of the 8 pieces of advice here is use the pending list. But I do really think it's important. It was something I just didn't really understand when I was first using Experience Builder. And now that I do, it makes a lot more sense. And then I would just say in general, this is maybe pithy advice, but I would just say the best way to really learn about Experience Builder is just to kind of click around and see what happens. There's a lot of features that are kind of hidden in plain sight, as it were. So for instance, when I was making this application initially here in this tablet or mobile view rather, I was like, it would be nice if instead of, having a lot of text and images all crammed up at the top of the screen here, like could I have people scroll through it? And the way I accomplished that was I added what's called a section. I added 2 views to that section, one for the total eclipse, its photo and text, and another view for the annual eclipse, its photo and text. And then I use this views navigation thing to have this nice little button interface to go between it. So now somebody on a mobile device, it feels like an application that you might download from the App Store. You can actually click on either of those buttons to move back and forth between the 2 things. It was something I hadn't used before, but it was like I figured there would be a way to do it. I clicked around, read some help documentation, and figured that out. Or likewise, on the General tab, I literally just learned this as I was preparing this presentation. There is an option there to change the application's favicon, that little icon that shows up in your web browser on the tab or on the window, right? By default, it's just the Experience Builder logo, which if you're making something for your organization, for a state government, like that's probably not the best logo to use. And I just had no idea that you could change that setting, but it's been hiding. It's just been right there in the General tab the entire time. I can just go up there and upload whatever logo I need. And now my application looks that much more professional, that much more like I know what I'm doing. I also learned as well, there's this button down here that I've mostly ignored because I have no idea what A11Y meant, but I was like, I'm going to look it up. A11Y is a shorthand for accessibility, the A and the Y, and then there's 11 characters between the A and the Y, so accessibility. And there's actually a toggle on there that Esri recommends you actually turn on from the start if you are making a full screen layout, kind of like I did. And I think what it's going to do is if you have that turned on, it's going to kind of optimize the app in the background so that people using assistive technology will better be able to navigate through your app. So obviously always a good idea to keep accessibility in mind, not just in terms of your font and your color choices, but even about how people are going to be using your application. That setting's just been down there and I've never looked at it before. I was clicking around, investigated, and found out what it was. And then finally, again, really relevant because Esri just did their ArcGIS Online update. There is a help button down here. And in that help button, there's a what's new link. And that's just going to take you to a page on Esri's documentation about the newest changes to Experience Builder, especially if you are making experiences on ArcGIS Online and it's up to Esri to decide when they're going to update it. It's probably a good idea, as fun as it is to read help documentation, to stay up to date about what they're changing, because they are still adding a lot of new things to Experience Builder over time. Again, they probably just added stuff last night that I'm not familiar with yet. So I need to look at that page myself again. Excuse me. But again, I think it is really useful, especially right now, as this is this really like dynamically changing piece of software that we're working with. Useful to keep on track about what's changing. So long story short, these were the 3 views I ended up making: desktop, tablet, mobile. I was obviously taking a lot of screenshots to help illustrate this story, as it were, but ultimately it really didn't take me that long to do it. But I think I was able to optimize my work because I kept some of these tips and ideas in mind. A few kind of wrap up bonus tips here, but then hopefully we have some time at the end to hear from you all. One thing that's been really useful to me to help me understand how best to design things is just to take a look at other websites, like well-established websites, and just, again, open up a browser tab and start changing its size and seeing how those websites react to different screen sizes. You're then going to see pretty quickly the things that do change size, like the area of the map, and those that don't, like the size of the title or other things on websites that either do or don't change sizes. Likewise, if somebody has made an Experience Builder application and you can get a copy of it or like a template of it, I found that to be a really great way to kind of learn, kind of by breaking it apart, as it were, learn how somebody else has set up an Experience Builder application, see what settings they've changed, how they accomplish what they did. Easiest way to do that oftentimes is to just look at their settings choices and maybe make a change and see what the result is. And one thing that at least my group within TDOT has been focusing or thinking about a lot recently is documenting our work. We're hoping that ArcGIS Online never has any catastrophic failure that somehow deletes all of our applications, but we do want to, we want to make sure we're prepared on that low chance that it happens, have that disaster recovery kind of plan ready. We haven't really found a great way yet to like exactly document everything we're doing when we configure an Experience Builder application. But that said, one thing we are doing is trying to document the non-obvious settings, the things that took us a little bit more time or a little bit more ingenuity to configure. Because while it's probably pretty easy for me to figure out, if I have the screenshot where the title was and what we had in here, maybe it was a little harder for me to remember, like, oh yeah, to make this widget work, I had to use these settings, X, Y, Z. So anyway, I've been talking for a while now. Hopefully this got some ideas flowing in your mind. Hopefully you learned at least something new here. Please do, if you want to follow up with me, feel free to send me an email. But I do want to kind of, again, either answer any questions that you have as best as I can, or maybe we have a little bit of time here for discussion. I have some kind of like discussion-y prompt questions here, things that have come to mind as I was making it. But yeah, really curious to learn from you all as well, because I still consider myself pretty new to this, and I feel like the best way to learn sometimes is to hear from somewhere else. So I'm going to stop talking here for a second. Thanks for your attention, and yeah, any questions or things you all would like to share?
If you have questions, either put it in the chat or unmute yourself and start talking. Going back to Andrew, one of your early slides, this is all great, but it's something that stands out to me is that the support for Web App Builder is ending quickly.
Yes.
So it's important for all of us as GIS professionals to dive into Experience Builder and figure out how we can use it best for our organizations.
Yeah, and again, that's been a big motivation for us as well. We still, it's not as drastic. We at least with TDOT, we're starting to, it's not our office, it's all of IT, but we're going to start pulling ArcMap from people this upcoming month, and we're getting, not everyone's happy about that. But at least we do have some more time for Web App Builder. We've got at least a year or two, at least on our enterprise portal, before that's going to get updated. But that feels like a long time now. But I also remember this time last year when we were telling people, yeah, you've got a year left in ArcMap, you've got time, no need to worry. And now people are worrying. So it is one of those deadlines that is going to sneak up on us pretty quickly. But like I was saying there too, even if Experience Builder feels a little bit daunting, there's a good chance you may be able to remake some of your applications on one of those other slightly more accessible, easy to use platforms. Again, not every time. Instant apps won't cover everything, but there may be some things where it could do that, and that's going to save you a lot of headaches. So as much as I love Experience Builder, it's not always going to be the solution, kind of like Web App Builder was.
Hey Andrew, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
What is something that the Web App Builder does that Experience Builder doesn't do well, I guess would be my, have you ever had any feedback from, if you have any I don't know if you have any apps out there that are editable, but Web App Builder had like a smart editor feature. And you can create the same thing in Experience Builder, but the formatting is different. And so I was wondering if you had gotten any feedback from people who are leveraging, if you are using sort of an editor feature, of being able to, I guess stack is not the appropriate word, but maybe being able to drag and have it not move around in different settings and stuff. Do you have any experience with the editor, the smart editor tool at all?
Yeah, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, that's all I was,
Yeah, no, it is a good question. We, at least with TDOT, we have a few of those that I think are on our to-do list to move over to Experience Builder. Just because, yeah, I think we've had that similar frustration too, where it wasn't as good. So unfortunately, I can't like directly answer that question, because at least any that I've done, we haven't really focused on that yet. We also do, just the way our system is set up, we do a lot of our editing kind of on other. We're not really using Experience Builder for that much editing, or even Web App Builder for that much editing. So we don't have a ton of examples, but I think I have a similar case where there was an application I was working on a few months ago, and kind of actually somewhat, well, I included it here, but the old version of the application on Web App Builder had it had a near me widget on it where you could type in your address and find the 5 or 10 closest facilities to your location, right? And for a while, Experience Builder didn't have that at all. And then about this time last year, they were like, or maybe more than a year ago, they were like, oh yeah, we've got this beta version now. We finally got the near me widget over to Experience Builder. And I was like, great, we can start rebuilding this. And I went into it, and it gave you the ability to like click on the map wherever you wanted to and find nearby facilities, but you couldn't type in an address at all. And I was like, oh, that's exactly what I need, right? Like people know their own address or their work address, and they want to find these 5 or 10 closest facilities. Like they may not exactly know where they are on a map, but they know their address. So like I need that capability. And then a few months ago, or about a year ago, Esri like finally said, okay, now it is out of beta. It's working, and you can do the thing where you can do the address search. And I was like, great. And I went and looked at it, and it still wasn't there. And I was like, what? And it's one of these things, and it's like a weird way that I think Esri almost expects us to like understand what they're going for, where you have to kind of combine two different widgets together. You have to take like a search widget where you actually can search for addresses, and have it like tie it into the near me widget, so that the result of the search widget is the input of the near me widget, so that it functions like it does. And they actually did have they put out a blog explaining how to do that, which I found to be really useful. but it did then require that for the application to make it look like it was one thing. Yeah, I had to get kind of creative. I had probably many stacked of those layout widgets to be like, yeah, when somebody opens up that near me widget, they're not just opening up near me, but they're also opening search. And so I kind of put search on top and near me at the bottom. And I had to spend a lot of it's a lot of kind of just like almost faking it in the background to remove outlines from certain things. So essentially make it look like it's just one thing. And I can't remember exactly how I made that same on one space on the screen. But I think it's kind of similar to what you were saying. It was a lot of kind of like fiddling with it in the background so that the end result looked like what we had before. But yeah, in Web App Builder, it just worked. You just brought it in. You didn't have to worry about stacking, making the search widget tie into the near me widget. It was just all one. It was all just one thing. And now I was able to get the same result, but I had to like think a little bit more like programmer developers. I don't even know how to think, but it was kind of like the harder way of achieving the same result. And so I know that's like a long example, but I think that's again maybe what you're getting at, where I think there are a lot of things that we can't out of the box do in Experience Builder like we could with Web App Builder, which I think is honestly one of the main downsides, right? I could just have brought that near me widget into a Web App Builder app and it would have done what I needed it to. But we can get there. It just does take that additional work and kind of thinking a little bit outside the box to be like, okay, well, if I need an address search with my near me widget, maybe I need to like have that other thing in there as well. I'm glad I figured it out. It definitely was a frustrating it was a frustrating process because it's like, how do you do this? But I do feel like there's probably other instances of things like that as well, where we can replicate things in Web App Builder, but we just have to think a little bit more outside the box. So hopefully that was, again, I know that didn't directly answer your question, but hopefully it was a good example story.
It addresses another issue that I've had in the past of having to think outside the box of the search feature in Web App Builder just worked,
Yeah.
It queried off of the layers that you have in your data, and then now you have to actually build in the functionality for it to search and then like zoom to the layer, and like a lot of that is like clickability and if they hit the enter key versus it's just a lot of different things you have to really think about, literally each iteration of how to get from point A to point B.
Yeah, which like I'm not, Esri's not paying me to be here. I'm not gonna like, necessarily defend Esri. I think I try sometimes to like see it from their perspective and be like, why did they make it harder on us? And I think maybe this is me giving them too much credit, but I do feel like the answer is like it's harder in that sense because it then does give us more flexibility to configure it more precisely for some other use. But that said, it is super frustrating when it was something that we used to be able to do really easily that we now have to. It is a little bit more harder, even if that makes something else possible. The thing we knew how to do is now harder. So yeah, it is like a weird. I go back and forth. Like I try to see their perspective, but on the other hand, it's like as an end user of the product, there are times where I just need to make the thing and move on with my life and not spend my entire day fiddling around with some setting to make it work.
One last question I have, and Lee can cut me off, but what is one application you gave early on in your presentation of kind of how you could think about one problem solution kind of thing in Web App Builder and create an instant app? Is there a scenario or an example that you can give us that you were using Web App Builder and you decided that the instant app was a better fit over Experience Builder?
Yeah, it's really gonna be. So I think what we did, and this honestly so I started with the state about 3.5 years ago. So people before me had been, I think, primarily using Web App Builder for most applications, including things that were relatively simple. So some of them are internal. So like I wish I could like share a link, but unfortunately I can't. Like the things that are coming to mind. But some of them were just like, we've got really rich data layers, and we did 99% of the work is on the web map in terms of configuring the pop-up and having the pop-up link out to other stuff and doing all the symbolization on the map itself, right? And then the application was essentially just the fancy wrapper to make it look nice, to give people an easy URL to remember. And maybe there was like 1 or 2 widgets there where they could search for their address or whatever. But it really was these like relatively simple things, where at most 1 or 2 widgets, but it's primarily like just showcasing the data for a broad audience. And I think that's kind of what I have in mind. Like your earlier example, if you're doing some of that data editing, yeah, like that's probably not going to be Instant App. If you're even maybe like trying to have multiple relatively complex widgets, maybe you want me alongside like a query widget alongside an attribute table, like that's probably not going to be Instant Apps as well. But if any of your organizations are like mine, you may have been using Web App Builder for something relatively simple. Like, I mean, just not that many settings on Web App Builder, just to give something that people could click on. We could have used the configurable apps for that too. And again, if you were using the configurable apps, the Instant Apps are for sure the replacement there. But I think that's kind of what I had in mind, was if it is something that's relatively simple, relatively straightforward, and Web App Builder was just kind of the thing that you use to make an application out of it. In that case, it might honestly be biting off more than you can or should chew. I'm mixing metaphors, to use Experience Builder, when I probably could replicate that application in Instant Apps as well. So it's going to be case by case. Most of those, I think that's kind of what I had in mind, those relatively simpler things.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the questions.
All right, we have a couple of minutes left. Are there any more questions for Andrew?
I should have said as well, I'm more than welcome to share these slides with you all, because I know I do a lot of instruction for TDOT as well, and that's why I love my giant arrows all over the place, which I know makes the slides kind of weird, but I always keep in mind like people who may want to look at the slides later. So glad to share these slides if you want to use that share that out as a reference.
Yeah, and we are also recording this entire presentation, and we will post that on our YouTube channel and on our website probably within the next week or so. Sometimes it takes us a couple weeks, but it's really great stuff. Thank you, Andrew. I appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Thank you, everybody, for joining. Please visit our website, ArcGIS.org. We have probably some more things coming, some more webinars, hopefully in July, and again, the class we have in August for intermediate Arc Pro. Please sign up if you wish. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for having me.